Welcome to the August 10th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I'll begin with some brief announcements. This Monday was the second in a series of 4 jazz concerts that are taking place at Henry Gourdine Park. Henry Gourdine Park is the new park that has just been established right outside of Harbor Square on our the village part of the waterfront, just north of Ossining Boat and Canoe Club. If you've not been down there to check out the park, please do. It's an absolutely lovely park with a playground and beautiful views of our glorious sunsets. And I got a notice today from village historian Dana White that the panels talking about the Ossining history of the waterfront that are going to be installed on the kiosk that's down there, they have now been created. They're being sent to Harbor Square and hopefully will be installed very soon. We're very much hoping that they're there by September 10th, which is going to be the Hudson River Ramble, I think it's called, and we've been partnering with historic Hudson River towns to have one of the rambles that's being promoted to folks across the region to be from beginning with the exhibit at our community center and welcoming people through the Sing Sing Kill Greenway and then down to the waterfront. And village historian Dana White is preparing a one of her patented presentations, this time focusing on all of the exciting things that she highlighted in the panels down at the waterfront, not least of which is Henry Gourdine himself and the Sing Sing prison. So I hope you will learn more about the Hudson River Ramble. Is on 2 different Saturdays, I believe, in September. That's September 10th and the 24th. And speaking of Henry Gourdine, the Ossining Arts Council is putting together an exhibit for Henry Gourdine at their Firehouse Gallery, and they have invited community members who are artists. If you have a piece relating to Henry Gourdine or his career that you would like to submit for consideration in the exhibit, please reach out to the Ossining Arts Council, and you can find them online. Maybe you can be part of that very exciting show, which highlights one of our iconic community members and all of his contributions to his life and career on the Hudson. Anybody else have something they'd like to share? Okay, then we have a very exciting agenda. Interim Manager Fraley.
Thank you, Mayor, Board. I have a couple of quick announcements. One is that I believe at the previous legislative session, I presented publicly that we were looking to receive the draft copy of the vacancy study for the ETPA, as that's an open hearing, with the next hearing being on September 7th. I would like to let the public know that we have not received the draft agenda to review as of this time. But when we do receive it, we will review it internally for quality control and accuracy, and then make it available to the public, hopefully well in advance of the next public hearing on the 7th. I see interested parties in the audience this evening, so I wanted to share that with them and to anybody watching on the internet. Secondly, I just received in my chair this evening when I popped upstairs, a couple of years ago, actually 3 years ago and up to 2 years ago, I would mention that we have $50,000 that we are expected to receive by the Dormitory Authority through one of our SAM grants, which is an acronym for State Municipal Facilities Program grant through DASNY, through Senator Carlucci's office, and his contribution towards our streetscape program on Secord Road in Lower Main. Just today, we received the grant distribution agreement documents. So it's yet another step to get that money, but the latest update is we need to go through these. It's not thin. Review and execute, send them back, and we're one step closer to receiving that offset money to put it into our coffers.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
Good news.
So our 3 agenda items are basically presentations tonight. Our first presentation this evening is by Mr. Kevin DeWarka. He is a land use and economic consultant from Kevin DeWarka LLC. some time ago, even preceding my tenure as the interim here, the board had requested and brought forth this group's organization to present to the board a housing needs assessment in conjunction with some of the studies they were undertaking and an assessment of what was going on in the village of Austin with their housing stock. So we have finally coordinated Mr. Dworka being on the agenda this evening. What was, I guess, first discussed is just securing a proposal. I think more this evening, I'm not going to steal too much of his presentation, but I think more of this evening is going to be a presentation of what a housing needs assessment is, with some detail relative to Austin. And then after the presentation, I think the question and answer period will help us define further what that scope will be. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Lynn Brooks Obney, our planner, and Mr. Kevin Dworka from Kevin Dworka LLC, where they're going to do a short PowerPoint presentation and then do question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce Kevin. I'm just going to briefly go through who he is. I'm sure some of you might have seen him at the Mayor's Roundtable at Pace Land Use Center in the past. He's the managing principal of Kevin Dworka LLC. He's completed neighborhood revitalization plans in Tarrytown, Newburgh, Albany, Chappaqua, Millward, Peekskill, and Poughkeepsie. He's presented on affordable housing training, education sessions in both Farmingdale and Patchogue. He's also an adjunct professor of real estate at NYU, and he's also a licensed land use attorney in New York State. He's also a member of the New York State Bar Association's Housing and Urban Development Committee. So without further ado, Kevin's going to run through a brief PowerPoint presentation with you.
Thank you all for having me here today. And I know that this topic of housing and housing needs has been on the mind of many people in this community for a long time. And so I am starting here just to lay out from the get-go what are some of the reasons why you would want to do a housing needs assessment, although I'm very aware this community has been thinking about this for a long time. And so I may be telling you a lot right now of what you already know, which is it's really helpful to get a objective, non-ideological, clear understanding of what your needs are. Now, of course, you can get it ad hoc. You can get it from a public hearing. You can get it from newspaper editorials. You can get it from your neighbors. But when you do a needs assessment, you back up and you try and create a holistic, quantitatively based portrait of what your housing supply is, what your housing needs are, what your housing demand is going to be in the short term, the medium term, the long term, and you analyze it in terms of the economics of your community, which I'm going to get to in a moment. Once you've got that assessment, the other reason why you want to do a needs assessment is to create a plan, an idea in terms of policies, regulations, development concepts that would meet your housing needs. And then the third reason for doing it is, of course, to implement. There's very little value in generating a plan that doesn't get implemented. So the whole point of doing a needs assessment, ideally, is not to just simply end at the midpoint of crafting policy solutions, but getting you all the way to the point of actual implementation of those solutions, whether they be through amendments of law or regulation or the facilitation of new construction, changes in organization, in coordination. There's a host of different ways, and we'll talk about some of them that implementation can be done. Before I get into the housing picture here, though, I want to start by talking about the economics. And I realize that so often the housing conversation in a community, as someone who works up and down this river, up to Albany, I'm very familiar with the affordable housing debate in the Hudson Valley, and I know that very often it unfolds kind of in isolation, and it's just talked about housing for the sake of housing. But obviously, housing is a critical piece of the overall economy of your community. And I think that there's two dimensions of this that right from the get-go need to be brought front and center. Of course, there is the economic status of your existing community and looking at their income levels and levels of poverty, their ability to afford housing, the socioeconomic context is very important. But also important, right at the get-go of beginning to assess your housing needs, is also to look at the economic realities of your community, your fiscal position, the way in which your existing supply of real estate is affecting your overall level of your tax base and how it's distributed in terms of allocations of tax burden to your community. Those are critical pieces to think about, as are the legal context, the planning context, what your comp plan, your zoning code. I know you've got since 2006 your housing policy statement, the associated regulations with that. But not only that, the procedure, the process, the hoops that one goes through in order to be able to put forward a housing development or an adaptive reuse project. These are two things you want to commence your needs assessment with a clear documentation of what's happening economically and what's happening legally. Once you've gotten that, you can begin a process of speaking with your community about what their housing needs are. Now, I do this a lot, and I speak in all different types of contexts, from venues such as this, in a much more formal, stiffer type of hearing format, to informal stakeholder conversations with one person, to roundtables, to focus groups. My thought is that it's important to do it in a compressed way, to do it in a way that allows for open, clear, intimate dialogue where we can record the information and really get a sense of what it is that people are feeling and thinking. Personally, my own experience has been that the roundtable approach of bringing together different constituent groups into focus group conversations is perhaps the most effective way to getting the diversity of viewpoints about housing needs. And I just listed a few of them that I thought might be different types of groups worth getting together into conversation groups. I realize, and I don't, if I've missed the most important one in your community, I know you'll forgive me, but just in terms of looking at the media coverage, looking in your comp plan, looking at different documents, these seem to be sort of like the recurring stakeholders within the housing conversation. And from that process, we begin to understand what is it that people are experiencing from all different dimensions, from the renter, from the homeowner, from the business owner, from the employer, from you as a village, from your county representatives, from your nonprofit organizations. There's not one group that has the monopoly on the housing policy agenda of your community, which is why it's really important to get the spectrum of opinions from various groups. I will be upfront. There is a limitation in the value of community input. On one level, it's very important because you get the breadth of experiences and opinions, but it doesn't insulate you from still having to do the work of understanding what is actually happening in a systemic way, right? Not just in the personal way, to what's happening to one person, one homeowner, one renter's experience, but what's happening across the board from the entire community. And so here in the existing conditions analysis is where we begin that process to quantify what's happening. And obviously you look at the demographic composition, the overall profile of your community in terms of income levels and employment in order to ascertain the types of housing needs that are required for different subsegments of your population. We do an exhaustive inventory of the existing housing units, looking at the varieties of buildings from rental to owners to multifamily, single family, the age of the buildings, examining the price points. When it comes to the affordable housing supply, we have to look at all of the different types of affordability that are provided, not just affordability that is tied to unit, but also affordability that is tied to person in the form of different types of voucher and subsidy programs. We look at the influx of capital that is coming into a community in order to facilitate, to finance affordable housing. That's a key piece. Your pipeline projects, sometimes small communities such as yours have a rather limited pipeline, but a lot of amazing things have been happening in the Hudson Valley in terms of new development over the last 3 or 4 years. And some of those amazing things are large projects, and some of them are small, little adaptive reuse of 2-unit family houses. So getting a sense of what's coming on the horizon and how those projects have come onto the horizon is important. And then, of course, a diagnostic about your vacancy and your foreclosure situation as an indicator of your distress. I know that's a hot topic on everyone's mind right now, and I am not keyed in to what the status is of that search for understanding what the vacancy is in Ossining, but I would say that it is a valuable part of a housing needs assessment. And from all of the communities that I've worked in the Hudson Valley, at some point or the other, we've had to do this type of vacancy assessment. And I just want to say that it's a lot more complicated than it seems, because you don't always know what buildings or what units are vacant. I mean, for example, we do tons of work in Poughkeepsie, but there's really no indication of when there is a building and there's just 2 units that might be vacant, but 3 units are not and the ground floor is occupied. We're not, through water usage rates, able to determine what the actual vacancy is going on in that building. So there's a little bit of an art and there's a bit of a science, and it really requires making maximum use of available data, but it also requires really getting to work cooperatively with your building department and your assessor and the full range of and brokers and realtors who can give you a sense and indication of where the vacancy levels are. You know, before coming tonight, I took a look at your foreclosure patterns. It's interesting. You know, one of the things about Ossining's foreclosure pattern is that it's enduring in spite of us being several years post-recession, and it is, unlike some other communities in the Hudson Valley, it's diffuse. It's not as though you have a concentration where all of your distressed parcels are clumped together. You actually have a enduring issue of foreclosure that is spread throughout the village, and of course it's not a very large village, but it's something for us, again, why we have to pay attention to this issue in a systemic way. That's the existing conditions analysis, and then of course it's looking at the housing development patterns in terms of, you know, what are those projects that are in the pipeline, what's been approved, what the time frame has been for those approvals. That helps me to understand maybe it's not an absence of financing that is interrupting the flow of new housing units. Maybe there's something on the process side, the regulatory side, that could be adjusted to expedite the delivery of new housing product. We want to better understand the density patterns and where new housing development is going. I say this about affordable as well as market rate housing. Not all housing belongs in all places. From a planning perspective, there are parts of a community that lend themselves more to multifamily versus single family, to mixed income housing, to all market, to all affordable. And so thinking about where are the ideal locations of new development is important. And also, of course, thinking about where you have demolitions and vacant properties that are en route to becoming developed. I want to add one more thing here, which I think is really important, and it's something, you know, I've done in a lot of my communities, most recently in Tarrytown, is the housing that has been built, the new housing that has been built. It really is important and valuable as a community to do the ex post analysis. How did that new housing affect your bottom line from a fiscal perspective? Did it help you, right? Because we can take a look and analyze how your current investments, your current pipeline of projects is affecting you from a municipal finance level in order to perhaps make better decisions and choices about how to allocate tax incentives and pilots and how to adjust the overall housing policy of your entire community. And I don't mean to suggest that projects that have been built are necessarily failures. It's just, let's step back and look at it from a very neutral perspective as to how did those projects perform given the type of financial architecture, given the product that came with them, given the types of units. How did they perform? What do they tell us? What can we learn from that? Housing conditions are key. I know code enforcement issues are an important topic in this community, as they are up and down the river. The vacancy issues, building violations, the remediation required for certain types of adaptive reuse. I've done a ton of work for the last 4 years in Newburgh, and we've really dealt with tremendous challenge with trying to bring buildings back onto the tax rolls while complying with the spectrum of regulations required for environmental remediation and compliance with historic preservation, not to knock environmental safety or historic preservation, but they introduce some significant challenges in the rehabilitation of a distressed housing property. And we have to deal with that as part of a housing needs assessment. And also looking at what your current policies are in terms of code enforcement and the rehab programs and the types of funds that you've got in your practices. Are they optimized? So often the problem in communities with code enforcement is they've got their regs right, but they just don't have the army of forces to do even 20% of what they would like to be able to do if they had those resources. And other times there's ways to deal with the web of regulations and enlist the community to kind of help along the process of enforcement. So those are the conditions issues. And then finally, this is the heart and soul of your housing needs assessment from my perspective, which is where we go beyond the community needs assessment and the economics and the policy analysis, and we give you some concrete ways of moving forward that are backed by all of that information. And as part of that, that's not just about saying what types of housing units do we need in this community for whom and where. It's also about thinking about your roadmap for the next 20, 30 years, about where you want to be as a community in terms of your fiscal health and the economic health of the households that you have living within this community. How do you create fiscal health at the village level, but also economic health at the household level? And that really has to be the starting point of your housing conversation. And then from there, you really then begin to dive deeper into the morass of these rather tricky questions, of which the Emergency Tenant Protection Act is but one, which is why I really, in preparing this presentation, cognizant of the debate unfolding over that, I wanted to back up and give you the spectrum, because there's a lot of other things that merit consideration in tandem with contemplation of ETPA, as well as looking at your tax incentive programs and the mix you want between your rentals and your home ownership, and probably one that is close and dear to my heart, which is just the overall continuing revitalization of your community. I can tell you've done some great things with your downtown, and you probably have some parts of your community that you still want to continue to strengthen. So how do you align your housing policy with your revitalization policy is something that should be addressed as part of your housing needs assessment. I happen to do a lot of housing training as well, and sometimes that's very important. I tend to get called in after the damage is done, where a community has found itself in court for violation of a Fair Housing Act, and then they have to come talk to Kevin like I'm a detention hall, which isn't so great. I rather provide proactively the guidance throughout the process to avoid you having to go into detention. But some sort of training component, I think, is part and parcel of the overall housing needs assessment process. That is, hopefully, if I were to spend time in a community such as yours, I would leave you all empowered once I'm gone to continue to make better and more informed decisions about the morass of state and federal regulations that affect fair and affordable housing and the delivery of all types of housing product, as well as housing finance and options. And then also in terms of the recommendations, just the sort of the last two, and then I'll close here, is from the implementation side, clear guidance. I know you had been contemplating your development approval process already and for some time, but are there things specifically with regard to your housing needs that could be done to tweak that in terms of financing, the legal regulatory changes? What happens to your bill? What happens once you decide upon your housing affordability policy to your zoning code, to your building code? Are there changes that potentially need to be made in order to support whatever policy changes may come out of this? Or is your legal and regulatory armature infrastructure already probably in support of your policies? We just need to bring that out. And then just the last piece here is, and this is something which has emerged as a really important piece in the work I'm doing in Albany right now on neighborhood revitalization and housing remediation, which is just coordination, because so often we end up in situations where there's a dozen different types of entities who are all trying to do the same thing and solve the same problem, but not all entities are empowered to solve the same part of the problem. One entity might be really good at assembling and gathering parcels of land. Another might be really good at getting the financing. Another might be really good at dealing with property management and guarding against code enforcement and building violation laws. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to bring the right, if once you figure out what you want to do in terms of your housing policy, there's a way to bring the right people together to solve the right problems in the right coordinated way. And that's where I'll close the presentation. So if there's questions, I'm very happy to answer them.
Thank you, Kevin.
Sure.
So I imagine there probably are questions. Who wants to start us off?
I looked at your projects on
You
your
gotta speak in that microphone.
Speaking of mic.
We wanna hear what you
10
say,
months,
Rika, you
and
know?
I still can't get this right. 10 months. Thank you for the presentation. It was great. And amazing they could do it in that time frame, so I appreciate that. I'm looking at the projects on your website that you guys have done, but I can't click through to actually see what they were. So is there a place to actually look at who you are
Yeah.
and your organization, so I can actually look at those projects and what the outcomes were of those projects?
Well, there's two things I could provide you. First of all, we've got complete descriptions for every project that we've done, so I
Great.
can provide you with that. And we've never had a client who said we couldn't share the deliverable.
Okay.
So that's the second piece. And we're all one very tiny family in the Hudson Valley, and I implore you to talk with all of the other communities that we've worked in, because they are probably in the best position to sort of tell you what the outcome of some of the planning initiatives are. But yeah, we can
Well, to your point, I
address
mean, the
to it.
whole idea here is to actually have some desired outcome. It's not just an inventory, right? I mean, that
Right.
in and of itself
Yeah.
would be good. I mean, I think it's something that we need. And getting a study like this together and then the inventorying of all of this is a big deal. But the bigger win would be, so what happened in Poughkeepsie from the study? What was done with the information? What did they do? What didn't they do? What did it do to improve the revenue? What did it do to improve the quality of life? I mean, that's a complicated city. I go there a lot, so, and I'm very familiar with the downtown. It's Peekskill, Tarrytown, Millwood. I mean, so how would I get that? I don't want you sitting here sending me, I mean, it looks like you have about 20 of these projects. And I don't know what each project is from
Yeah.
the descriptions. I don't know what to ask for.
Well, I can start by sending the project descriptions,
Okay.
but I'm also open to having dialogue about all those projects you just
Okay.
mentioned, and
That's
and,
fine.
and I will tell you about the successes, and I will also tell you about the failures, because they're both, and there was lessons learned in each of those cities about the difficulties and challenges of translating policy into action.
Right.
So I'm very happy, and
That'll be great.
and if there's any in particular of those, even at this moment, that you wanted some clarification on what the outcomes were or lessons learned from them, and you're interested,
No,
you can
I'll
follow
reach
up
out to
separately.
you and I'll
That's
look
fine.
at it, and I can
Okay.
look up some of these now that I have some of the names that I can look up, so I appreciate that.
Okay, sure,
Thank you.
pleasure.
Others? Please, Manny, go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a very interesting presentation. And I'm just going to piggyback what Rika just mentioned in regards to the website. I had a chance to take a look at it early today, actually. And something that I was interested to see is that if you have anything, because your presentation here is for the housing needs assessment for the village of Austin, but I didn't see any other projects or any other communities that you have done something very similar to that, or did I miss a project?
Well, they're all called something different. Like, so we for
Which
example,
one will be the closest
like
one that
in-
I can?
we've assessed housing needs though in virtually all of them, but they just have different titles. So, like for example, Newburgh was called the Newburgh Neighborhood Revitalization Plan, but what we really did was work on a housing remediation plan for a 5-block residential area and came up with 5 full redevelopment plans and financial models to move those projects forward. So, and then the prelude to that was an assessment of housing needs and a demand model to determine what the number of units could be absorbed in that area and how many of those units. So, I mean, even if
But
you
it
look
wasn't
at
a small scale, so to speak, because you're talking about just a couple blocks, I guess,
Yeah,
from,
but that-
from within the town or the village or the city.
Yeah, although that came out of analyzing the housing needs at the larger scale, including the surrounding region. So let's, for example, take your community, right? I mean, you've got, I think it's 3 square miles, but we obviously would not limit the assessment only to the housing dynamics that are unfolding in these 3 square miles. It would radiate outward to the surrounding areas to understand the broader regional housing demand. And then every community is different, so I don't know, but it might end up being that one of your policy goals is to focus on supplying a greater amount of housing within, you know, a 5-minute walk of your Main Street corridor. This is just a pure hypothetical, right? You know, and so then there's a level of geographic concentration that happens, but you're always moving at multiple scales. So.
My other question is actually for Lynn. Sorry. Thank you. In the past couple months, we kind of had different conversations and different studies that we should be doing, and they're all kind of related to each other. If the board was to decide to go with the housing needs, will that complement all the other studies that we're supposed to be doing, or that you have brought up to in front of us? And how does that related to? I just want to make sure that we're doing. We're just gonna do one that will complement everything, or or is there something else coming in a couple more months that we'll have to take a look at it again?
Do you mean the parking assessment?
Pretty much correct. Because I don't, because that's gonna be the same, very similar to what we're doing. It's just for in a specific area, but we're talking about like doing the whole village at that point. So if we're gonna be doing this, how does that relate to all the stuff?
Right, because Kevin did talk about the importance of aligning any goals or plans that you have for housing with your revitalization and economic development goals. So
Right. So likely this would be the start, and if we needed to further it with a parking study to analyze parking in either specific or a broader context, that would probably come next. But the other studies would be the PACE studies that we'd be participating in their land use training, and that's members of the community and village staff and members of the board or different land use boards that are actually dissecting some of our own policies. So it would be in conjunction with a housing needs assessment study if we took that on.
So in a way, if we want to do the other studies, this will be sort of the foundation of any other study that we may want to take into.
Yes, and it would align because the work with PACE would be concurrent during the fall, so they would terminate around the same time in December.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
John, go ahead.
No, then I'm good. We'll catch up later. Very, very good presentation. There were some figures and information that you displayed. There was some economic data. I'm just curious the source of that data that you had provided around the income information.
Well, the data that we looked at was the most recently available census data, which is American Community Survey 2010,
Okay.
2014,
Okay.
which is an average of a 5-year
Sure.
period. So it doesn't
Okay.
really refer to one discrete year, but that's where it came from.
Okay. And then the housing data that you provided was also a very interesting slide for me. So
In terms of the distribution of the types of units
yeah,
that you've got.
the types of units
Also
and stuff like
ACS
that. I found that
2014.
very, very instructive.
Yeah.
Just as because they were really the only 2 data points that you provided for us. I think the thing that's really important to me is whatever data we collect is going to be, I guess, from an empirical perspective, defensible in relationship to grant opportunities and other things. I think that if we're going to go through the exercise of doing all this, I'd want to make sure that whatever data we gather and put together and verify that we would be able to use that to gain access to other funds through either grants or other economic vehicles. So I think from my perspective, I mean, I'm very interested in your approach. I think it's holistic, and I think that you're looking at a lot of different aspects of things. There are so many dependencies around economics, and obviously housing is a huge one. And you talk about the economic health of the people living here. I mean, that is so important because if you have economic health across all the spectrums, that provides for a vibrant community. So I'm certainly excited about that. You know, I'd certainly be interested, you know, pending any reference information. And obviously, if you could provide references of municipalities that you've worked with that where you've assembled this type of data before, so we could understand a sense of how you engage, and you know, really get feedback from your clients on what their feeling was. And even if you, as you indicated, you know, sometimes you don't know what the outcome's going to be. You know, you start out on a journey and you think you're going to go somewhere, and the unintended consequences of things. So I'd be interested to know about things that you didn't feel went so well as well, and what were the lessons learned from that. So
Yeah, I can do that, and I'm glad you brought up the funding piece. I usually, this was the first summer where I was not buried by CFA applications, but I typically am, and I write, to be perfectly honest, I do write my deliverables anticipating the 100-word responses required in question 26 for ESD grant. That we prepare ready to go language and the data points, very familiar with all of the programs in those applications. And obviously there's other ones that are not included in the CFA, but it's true that measuring the magnitude of distress and documenting it is an important prerequisite to qualifying for different types of funding programs, and we need to make that clear in any deliverable we provide you. So yeah, for sure.
thank you.
I have no questions. I enjoyed the presentation, and I like the fact that you highlighted the need of really looking at the right type of housing and the balance. I think when we talk about affordable housing, many people say, well, we may have enough or we don't have enough, and I think this study can really show us the right type of balance and to also address the fiscal health of the village. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
You got it. Yep.
So as I introduced Mr. Dworka, I did say that this was going to be a presentation to give a more holistic view of what his LLC offers as far as consulting services. I think we got a very clear picture of that. I enjoyed your presentation as well. I was particularly interested, and I believe I felt Tom's vibe too, about a retrospect on pilots and tax agreements with developers, and looking back to see if they're successful or maybe not so successful, looking back 10 or 20 years into those type of deals that were made way back when. So with that in mind, we have, like Trustee Casada brought up, other studies that were pending and we were considering as part of our comprehensive plan and our downtown development and our development village-wide. So we will put that all into the pot and take this presentation and have some internal dialogue. I'm sure the board will welcome public input into what they saw tonight, and we'll converse with Mr. Dworka following this presentation and try to narrow it down to a little bit more of a proposal presentation if and when he's back in front of you again sometime soon.
Kevin, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
For joining us.
Pleasure.
We've enjoyed your presentations over the years when we do the regional conferences, a lot at the Pace Land Use Law Center, as Lynn had referenced earlier, and you've done a lot of really interesting work, and so it's a pleasure to have you here taking a look at Ossining, and I look forward to what we consider next internally and come back to you perhaps later. Thank you so much.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Our next presenter this evening contacted the board a few weeks back to come and make a presentation on enrollment in the Austin School District. Superintendent Mr. Ray Sanchez is with us this evening. He has a presentation he'd like to make, and although it's not going to be on the screen, he does want to pass it out to you all to follow along. Welcome, Mr. Sanchez.
So unlike you, we always get PowerPoints whenever you present. We get PowerPoints from you all the time.
Full disclosure, I wasn't sure you had it, so
Oh, you don't come here often enough.
effective nonetheless.
Oh, okay. Maybe we don't have enough. Do we have
We're
enough?
good, yeah, we're good, we're good. We can share with the audience if
Yep.
We do.
If he has anything on the paper he needs to show, I can zoom in.
Prezi? I don't even know what that means.
It's a different form of PowerPoint,
okay,
just
okay.
a little more interactive.
No PowerPoint.
Yep. So, good evening, and I just want to thank the board for the opportunity to come and share some information regarding the school, specifically related to the enrollment. And I do hope everyone at the same time is enjoying their summer, although today's a really hot day. My hope here is just to kind of give you a sense of what's happening within the schools related to enrollment. I know that there's been a lot of conversations within the community as to the impact of developments and what that might have on the school district. So I thought coming to you, and I want to thank the mayor for the opportunity too, is to share the actual facts and what it really, what the numbers are telling, and at the same time, what the impact is that it's having on the school district and programs. So some of it, the data that you'll see included in this, in your handout, is from our demographer. Every year we have a demographer's report. The individual comes from Eastern Suffolk BOCES. She provides around October projections as to, or updates the information regarding our enrollment. She looks at developments that are taking place, proposed developments, anticipated completion of those developments, birth rates, and obviously existing enrollment within the district. So those drive also our budget. So that from there, I use that information to determine number of sections that we might anticipate. But at the same time, we start using that data to start looking into the future in terms of what the enrollment will be and the impact it may, the number of classrooms and space that we're going to need. So I'm going to be on page 1, the bottom slide. It says demographics. This is inclusive of pre-K, so you can see over a period of time between 2003, 2004, 2015, 16 that we've almost increased by 900 students in that short period of time. Also with that, there's been a shift in our demographics. We've moved to about 52% Latino, and actually our free and reduced lunch counts have also increased significantly. Back in 2003, 2004, free and reduced lunch was about 32%. We're now at about 52%. And so keeping in mind that 52% is out of a larger number, so your end size is more significant. The next page on the top is our enrollment projections from the demographer and where she sees enrollment going into 2025. Now, you'll see that why I share this slide is because what I really want to get across is that this isn't a bubble. You know, sometimes in districts you have to get over a short hump of a large cohort of students that's coming through a system. And what you're noticing here on this chart is that we're not necessarily seeing a bubble where we just have to get past, and then all of a sudden we're going to start seeing a relief in the future. And what I mean by relief is more so in the area of space. In this case, it's more so a leveling off. If the pattern, as noted here, continues, we're going to continue to increase and then level off with a slight decrease, but not as significant to the point where we would impact classroom space. The slide below gives you a sense. The top is a yellow graph or bar that shows where kindergarten through grade 5 projections are going. You can see the increase and then a leveling off. And you can see at the middle school and the high school, the green representing the high school and the red representing the middle school, that you're going to continue to see increases as we project forward. 2022 is where we anticipate the highest peak for the high school, or the peak for the high school, and about 2018 for the middle school. And obviously, all this is subject to change. But we're going to continue to see that increase as we project forward. Currently, at the middle school, there's about 1,000 students in total. I want to draw your attention to the next page, and it's a color photo of one of our reading teachers teaching one of our students. And what doesn't come across here is that's actually a classroom reading instruction taking place on the stage of Brookside School. We have reading instruction taking place on stages behind curtains because of the lack of space that we have for small group instruction. We've since then renovated some lower level classrooms at Brookside School, which will help and alleviate some of that. But the point being is that it's beyond just classrooms for cohorts of students in grade, with first grade teacher. We also have related services. We have E&L teachers, reading teachers, special education teachers for resource room that need adequate space to work with students. So once again, you can just think about what it's like to teach reading on a stage when you have your lunch periods going on, and behind the curtain is one-to-one, hopefully, or small group instruction taking place. So it is a strain, but I do want to give credit to our staff. They work diligently with our students, and they do the best they can to create the best environment for the children that we have. The lower slide is just things to consider, because oftentimes it's about, I'm often asked, do we have enough classroom space? It goes beyond just classroom space. As we increase our buildings in terms of what they were projected and what they were built for and what they're currently serving now is significantly different. And what I mean by that is, obviously we need classroom space, but there's a strain on parking. If you go to some of our schools, there is a need for parking spaces in a variety of our schools. Absent a park school, that's always the issue. But you can go to Claremont School, middle school, and a variety of others. And that needs to be considered, as particularly if you're going to increase in staff. Our cafeterias, this takes students about 20 minutes, if not a little bit more, to get through our cafeteria lines, keeping in mind they have 40 minutes for lunch. So that means you get 20 minutes to go through, then in turn eating, and then hopefully you get some time outside. And obviously getting outside for recess is extremely important for our children. But the cafeterias weren't necessarily built, the serveries weren't built necessarily for the amount of students that we're serving in the schools. Special area is really related to music classrooms, physical education classrooms. Those need to be considered. You may notice as you go on Route 9, there's a new physical education space that's being developed at Ossining High School. That's going to alleviate some of the stress that we have where we only have the one gym to provide physical education. And also we're using a lower level classroom for what we'll call physical education. This will be an adequate space for the type of instruction that we want to provide, that being the new addition. And then related services is the other area for consideration. So that specifically relates to speech teachers. In some cases, we have some closets that have been made into classrooms. In other cases, we have classrooms that are obviously being shared among many individuals. But those need to be considered when we look at an entire instructional program. We want to make sure, again, that everyone has adequate space for the type of instruction that the program calls for. And so the space should support the program. And so my final slide, I'll close with some remarks, is basically the summary that comes from our demographer. And I know everyone can read, but I'll just read it aloud particularly for our viewing audience. So the first bullet, gains in district enrollment are projected to continue during the next 5 years, followed by relative stability during the latter half of the period. Elementary grades will peak at 2017, followed by small decreases beginning in 2018. Increases will be seen at the middle school through 2018, followed by stability through 2024. The high school grades will see gains through 2023. This year, kindergarten to birth ratios was the second highest of historic period. This ratio should be monitored very carefully. And there are a number of local building projects before the planning boards. These should also be monitored to determine the possible impact on the school district. So Some things that we're working on relative to space particularly and how they relate to enrollment. We've been very fortunate that our community supported a bond that has provided for the addition of a science wing, physical education space that we're adding, and interior. In the interior of our buildings, we've actually tried to look at being more efficient and making space that maybe wasn't as used as efficiently, making it space that's better serving the students that we have in the district. The middle school, the same. It's been transformational. If you've walked into the middle school, if you haven't, I'm happy to give you a tour. It's changed completely. And so we've done renovations on the interior. We've actually become more energy efficient as a result of the work there as well. We have other areas that we've been working on to try to gain some space. I made reference to a lower level at Brookside School that hasn't been used really efficiently for many years. The air quality has not necessarily been where we wanted it to be. We've just renovated it now, so it wasn't used at all. In fact, it was mostly used for storage. Now we have 2 brand new classrooms opening up in September that'll be used for, excuse me, for instruction, and we have a small group reading room for our teachers as well. So we're pleased that we're able to make that addition. Moving forward through the budget process and through the SMART bond was a bond that was passed throughout New York State. Many of the districts in the state of New York are using it for technology. We're one of the few that are choosing not to use it for technology. We feel like we're adequately equipped for technology, meaning the types of programs and infrastructure that we have. But we intend to use the SMART bond to create an addition to Park School. So my hope is that by next year we'll be able to have the start of the addition to Park School. Thank you. Is it that obvious? And then finally, the other funding source that we're fortunate to be able to use to address some of the items that I made reference to here is a debt service reserve that we had initially intended to use to offset any spikes that we saw relative to the bond. Because of interest rates coming in more favorable than we thought, building aid coming in at better than we anticipated, we didn't have to use that. So through the budget process, actually, the community supported the use of that towards infrastructure and capital. A portion of that, which is approximately $3 million, will be used towards completing the addition at Park School. Some of it will be used to complete a Roosevelt project in terms we're trying to address the cafeteria at Roosevelt School for the same reasons here to make sure that students can go through as efficiently as possible. And then we have some money set aside there to wait and see if there's any funding sources that we can sort of tag on to maybe move towards a larger project, and that'll be determined by the board, hopefully relatively soon. So I said it was low tech. You saw it was low tech. But my goal was really to provide you a sense of where the data is, where we are, and hopefully more so to engage in a conversation with you in terms of enrollment for the district. So I hope I didn't disappoint that I didn't have a PowerPoint.
I'm sure we have more questions. So anybody want to kick us off? Yeah, okay, go ahead. People are jumping out of their seats to ask questions.
Question. Is the, what 52% is free and reduced lunch? Do you actually
Right.
have the breakdown of the percentage that is actually free versus reduced?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess I'd just like to say how impressive it is that the school district has been able to thrive the way it has, given the budgetary constraints you've had since 2008 and since the lack of foundation aid. We're blessed to have a great school here, and both my children started at the beginning and went all the way through and had a great experience, and I'm always thankful for that, and I think our community is thankful for that. I'm hoping that you're going to get some relief here. I mean, are they going to make good on the foundation aid? I just sort of wanted to get an update to find out if there's anything going on
Yeah,
with
you know,
that.
that's every year I want to go in and say yes. There's the whole debate between GEA, which was a gap elimination. That was money that the state took from all the school districts to basically balance their budget. And over the year, and that actually impacted all school districts. So there's been this debate among the legislature, or there's various communities that are really pushing for GEA. And then there's communities like Ossining that are pushing for foundation aid. Well, the legislators last year eliminated the GEA. So that means foundation aid is left. So my hope is that now we can start seeing some of the funding that we need and actually deserve per the formula. But time will tell. But the whole, do you fund GEA and foundation aid, that argument's gone. It's eliminated from the table. So now it's really about foundation aid and appropriate funding for public schools.
Okay. I know you mentioned at the last bullet point in the summary, you talk about local projects before the planning board and sort of monitoring what's going on. When you look at the numbers that you have here, are you looking at sort of the current state of housing that exists, like at this timestamp? In other words, are you looking at any of the developments that are in the pipeline when you consider the projections going forward?
Yeah, the demographer actually takes that into account. She calls both, the planning boards and see what we can anticipate, and she projects based on what is being proposed, how many students we can anticipate for various projects. So that is inclusive in what we see here. If there are new ones that present themselves, I oftentimes call the demographer and say, I didn't see this on the list. And she'll give me a sense of what the numbers might mean in terms of what it will yield as it relates to students. So at this point, she does a very thorough job of including that. It's not just who's here, but also taking into account what's coming.
Okay, thank you.
Manny?
Sure. Thank you. Ray, thank you. It's always nice seeing you here. Should come more often. So in the past almost 11 years, we have an increase, as your presentation shows, about, I want to say, just round it off, I guess, 1,000 students. It's 949, 940, actually. So in the next projection that the study that was done, it goes to 2025. What does that mean to the existing buildings? What does that mean, the increase? Because now you mentioned that you have new classrooms.
Right.
You did some adjustments in some of the school buildings. We're seeing a big portion of addition to the high school. Since I went to high school here, I think there's been at least 3 additions to the high school so far since '96.
At least 2.
At least 2. So what does that mean for 2025?
It's a good question. Some time ago, during the course of last year, I provided the Board of Education, really to the entire community, a list of capital needs that we have for the district, including space. So I outlined classroom space that we need, but there are a variety of others. For instance, the fields are going to soon need to be replaced. They've been here for a number of years in terms of, if you think back at when they were installed, it's coming soon. And so now we're trying to prioritize in terms of what that's going to be. My point being is that if it continues and the trend continues, there's going to be a need for additional classrooms. I think right now we're being as efficient as we can. And oftentimes, I think it's a credit to our staff, both the administrators, the leaders in each of the buildings, and the teaching staff in the classrooms to mitigate some of the the space that they are teaching in. But going forward, if it continues to project going up, there's one of 2 things: either we build on, or we call for a need for more classrooms, or if it stays status quo, the only other option that we would have is to increase class size. And what I mean by that specifically is because you have a set number of classrooms. If you can't add to it, you're just going to fill those classrooms even further and further and further, whether you want to or not. So you have to find some form of relief. Otherwise, that's your other option. And in speaking to the community, I would say that I value personally, as an educator and also as a parent, appropriate class size, which we've been able to support through the support of our community. But projecting and going forward, if we don't have the flexibility, that might be something that is compromised.
It's interesting to see because that what is the minimum classroom size right now for you guys for the either for middle school or
Square
high
footage?
school? No, just student wise.
You know, it all depends. You know, in the early elementaries, like pre-K is capped at 18. That's by law. We
school?
cap it at, high school varies depending on courses, but you average around, 25 students in a class. But, you have your highs and lows. That's like an average. There's some that are lower and obviously some slightly higher, but we try to stay around that range. It reaches a point of, where it's no longer as effective as you want it to be.
Rika.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you. I sort of curious about the presentation. What is it that the Board of Trustees can actually do for the school system in this conversation?
The initial thought was to build awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as, we go, let me go back. I think we work really well together. I think village and the town, Joy, speaking to Ms. Garrity and everyone else. So, and we've actually really talked and been together worked together as relates to new construction and developers that are coming into the community. That's one. Two is I want to make sure you, as board members, have accurate information. This is not, I often hear through the pipelines that this is a conversation that takes place, and as new developments come up, I'm sure you're going to continue to hear that. So you should be equipped with the right information so that you can articulate very clearly to the rest of the community what I hope is accurate information. In the end, what we do with it, that's for us to decide, but, I want the community to have as, the facts, not necessarily, hypotheticals or around, guesses, because that truthfully, that becomes very dangerous down the road. Continued partnership is really what I'm seeking, and making sure that you're aware of what needs to be done.
I'm just, the demographic studies flatten out. I don't know why the demographer thinks it'll flatten out, actually. I would, when you look at the slope from 10 years ago, and you look at some of the issues facing the village, which have become very public, I would not have flattened it out, actually, because any regressional analysis she or he did would not draw that conclusion. It would actually draw a slope that continues, trending upwards. And 25, to me, sounds so far away, but I realized as you were talking that it's actually less than a decade, which is really nothing.
Right.
So I was actually surprised to see that, because I actually think the story is much more powerful than being presented, and for me, a lot scarier. Because brick actually ends at some point, right? You're going to run out of space. That is a fact. And a lot of the other trends that you're seeing are not actually consistent with some of the school systems surrounding us, which it's actually, you don't actually do trends, you only did ossining.
Mm-hmm.
But if you Google this stuff, you actually see that the trends in some areas of this county actually are different.
They're very different, actually.
Very different in areas that you would think would be very similar to us. And that's very troublesome to me, that we have somehow, we may not be an economic bubble the way you describe it, but there's something going on here. And it's actually, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't be sleeping at night, because it's actually quite scary. So, not because it's your fault, because I don't know where the answers would come from. And that was actually the first question. When people come and talk to us, I'm always sort of, I've asked this often, what can we do to help? How can we do? The information is great, because getting this from the media is not good.
Right.
Because I don't know where they're getting anything from. So I'm really appreciative of this very succinct, here are the numbers based on what we look at. So that's been great. But I actually think the issue is a rolling trend, because I think in 3 or 4 years, you're going to say these numbers were actually lowballed. I think you're going to see a much higher issue with the lunch programs, inefficient space, and a whole bunch of other issues that arise out of this. I want to know how to help is the bottom line here.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you bringing up the trends, because, I don't have the hard data, but I sit in rooms with other superintendents who tell me they're closing schools. because of enrollment, and they can tell because you can actually start with your kindergarten cohort. That's the group, right? And if you have a really small kindergarten cohort, you can actually start projecting. And in fact, where they actually start telling staff members that we can anticipate, not necessarily a need for a said position in
Yeah.
2 years from now, because they've done those said projections. And that's a cost savings, number one. But two, it helps as it relates to space. Only because it was public. Katona just closed the school recently. The controversy was different in terms of as it relates within that community, but nonetheless, it was about, in the end, they closed the school. Our trend is quite different. Someone asked me, well, why? I think I'd like to attribute it to the quality of the education here. And I'm sure that is a drive for many, and the variety of programs that we do offer, from full-day pre-K to science research to dual language programs, to arts, athletics, the list is there. As it relates to the trend and what the demographer's saying, time will tell. But we're at the capacity component. We're at that point where as we continue to add more classrooms, we may not have the flexibility. Actually, we likely won't have the flexibility.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I know this year you just rolled out serving lunch at the high school. How many people attended that?
The summer program.
Yeah.
About 100.
100?
Yeah.
You also, one of the things that Ossining has been able to do is we've always had a robust pre-K program, but a year or two ago it became a full-day pre-K, and I'm just wondering, the numbers that are here seem to be reflecting kindergarten. Are the pre-K numbers included in this, and has that changed your numbers at all?
No, demographer doesn't include in her projections pre-K, because pre-K is a stable number.
Right.
So that's at 252. So you can add it to the number, but it's never going to increase or
Got
decrease
it.
unless
It's
we add a
constant.
section.
It's a constant. Got it.
And then there's we serve about 36 students through the Children's Center, the Ossining Children's Center.
Right.
Full day.
I know that one of the reasons you said you came here is to continue our very healthy and collaborative relationship with the schools. And you got a chance to meet with Lynn Brooks-Avni, our Director of Planning and Development, recently. I know that there've been some efforts to meet in the past, but you actually did get to meet. And do you feel that that the relationship with the village is going in a good direction, that you're going to have increasing opportunities to have access to information about what's going on with our planning and development, and continuing to increase our information sharing and getting into the conversation earlier with developers?
Yeah, I'm pleased I had the opportunity to actually meet with Lynn yesterday. Seems like a week ago, because I don't sleep. And we had a very productive conversation. Number one, to give you a sense of what the school districts are like, and but the other part of it is how can we work collaboratively. And she has some innovative ideas and wants to think a little bit outside the box, which is refreshing in terms of trying to work together. And at the same time, as new development comes and is considered, we agreed that we would have ongoing conversations. I propose quarterly chats. We may not need quarterly chats, but just to say, this is what's going on, or this is what's being considered. So again, more so for awareness, if anything else. And when there's an opportunity to share some thoughts relative to new development, she again shared that there was an opportunity to talk and be part of that as well, and would consider the district as it relates to that. So going back to one of your questions, do I think it's going in the right direction? It was going in the right direction. It's continuing in the right direction. So I'm pleased. I'm glad I had the opportunity to meet with Lynn yesterday.
And we could all sit around and say wonderful things about the schools. As not just the mayor and a taxpayer and a community member, I'm a parent, and I'll be a parent in the district for the next 10 years. So selfishly, I look forward to continued wonderful programming with reasonable class size. My kids are in elementary school. It's about 22, 23 kids in each classroom, and that's a good number of kids for one adult to do an excellent job of educating all day long. So I hope we can maintain those kind of numbers. And if I didn't quite understand it, forgive me, or maybe the plan's not exactly clear yet. You've given a report about the capital needs. You've
The
reported
general
on.
overall, these are the things that we're gonna need.
Right. Oh, yeah, and I know when my kids play on the field at the track at the high school. And
Yeah,
that,
I'm
that,
just using that
yeah.
as an example. It was inclusive of, like, safety and security needs. You know, I'll use the high school as an example. We don't, you know, we added that as a need for a main entrance up to the high school. You know, we've become comfortable to it, but we actually enter in a hallway. So we've talked, that's included in the presentations as well. So there's safety, space, and then athletics is in there as well.
And that's going to be going out to a bond?
No. There's still much more conversations that need to be made. I think we're trying to do as much as we can right now with our capital line. We have other funding sources that came, you know, we have the 1.3 that came through the Smart Bond that we're gonna use for, in addition to Park School. And then we're gonna just try to, develop a plan fiscally that'll start addressing some of them. Bond is a last resort, but don't wanna use the B word just yet.
I didn't mean to frighten anybody by using
No.
the B word, because I remember the last time the
Much
one
more coming.
failed, which would have addressed some of these concerns, but it looks like
It takes a lot
even
more
if
conversation.
this demographer is right on target, you're looking at another 300 kids from today in the district, right? At the leveling off. Could go even higher than that, because it's going from like 4,700 to like 5,000. Okay. Okay, there it is. That's what I'm looking at. I didn't need to actually try and count the little dot spaces. That's what, like 30, that's like it's like a classroom in each grade. So that's like another classroom
Right,
in each grade. So that's like
correct.
2, 3, 4 in every
Most of
building.
it's gonna be, we're gonna see, again, she's noting that most of the increase is coming at the middle school and the high school. We took that into account when we developed the science wing. That was actually part of the reason why, is that we anticipated more students. So we feel, we have some flexibility at the high school. It's the other buildings that are more so of a concern. Even though we were able to work and address much of the middle school, all that work was on the interior. So we didn't build out to add more space. We just looked on the interior and really looked very carefully for every corner to develop classroom space that we felt was adequate for student learning.
I seem to recall there was a report that was done 8 or 9 years ago that talked about potential developments, to potential additions to Claremont School, or to, I know you ended up doing some work internally, obviously, with Roosevelt School when you moved the administration building to.
The original bond,
Boulevard. Go ahead.
the original bond called for fifth grade to be an addition at Claremont so that we can bring fifth grade over. That bond failed, and so we decided to look within, and so we've moved central office out. We're now at 400 Executive Boulevard, and since then we're looking and renovating the interior of Roosevelt School. Those classrooms at Roosevelt School are about 650 square feet. Normally, if they're built, they're 750 to 800. So you can just imagine that they were tight. So we're working, last year we did the third floor. This year we're taking care of the second floor, and we're moving the principal down to the lower level, to the first floor. So we're
You're still maximizing space inside.
Maximizing
the
space.
existing envelopes.
Yep.
And you think that that's probably going to work, assuming that the demographer's numbers are somewhere in the ballpark of reality? Which, there's reason to believe that they are, right?
Roosevelt is in better shape.
Okay. I mean, I could sit around and talk about the schools
I
all
mean,
day, but there's
so-
so many great things that are happening between the two us, or the entities, but go ahead.
So how many classrooms do you need, or are you fine, like, based on the projection?
I'll share the following. You never really want to work at 100% in terms of your buildings. You want some flexibility. 90% is probably where you want to be, or maybe a little lower. We're at 100+% in some of our buildings, and we're making it work. I don't have the actual number of classrooms. I'd have to go back to that presentation that I shared. But I can share it's more than one in each building. It varies per building, but I would say, well, I'd have to go back to the presentation, which I'm happy to share with you.
Want to ask anything, Paul? You should wrap it up.
Thank you.
Turn it on.
Mike?
Thank you.
Turn it on.
Okay. I'll thank you again, Ray, for the
Thank you, Ray.
presentation.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you very much. You know what? Can we take a 5-minute break? We actually have one more thing on the agenda that's printed, and then we have another discussion after that. And I'd just like to take a quick break. Is that all right? Right.
Sure.
Thanks. Welcome back. You didn't miss a minute of the excitement. Interim Manager Fraioli.
Thank you again. Our final presentation this evening.
Oh,
Sorry?
well, I mean, Lori Lee's going to talk to us about the Anchorage resolution. So
Okay.
it's not a presentation. You're right. This is the final presentation. Go ahead. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Our next presentation is a code enforcement update and some proposed legislation. It's going to be a really two-part presentation. I'm going to tell you a little background on each. As you know, every year we send out, and I'm just talking to Tom about zooming in, we send out our, how's that camera, Tom, okay? We send out our solid waste newsletter in English and in Spanish, which includes protocol for disposal of your solid and recyclable materials. That's supplemented with English and Spanish educational material and instructions on how to dispose of those materials. It's on the webpage. We speak about it often in our meetings. And unfortunately, it is sometimes not amended to by the residents of the Village of Ossining. So we discussed how to make certain sections of the village's code more stringent, thereby allowing for a more enforceable and strict penalty should residents choose to not follow the stated code. So we met some months ago and discussed some preliminary changes, and Corporation Counsel and the prosecutor have met internally and between themselves to develop changes to Section 225, and we're going to present that this evening. And along with that presentation, we're also going to talk about a more holistic code enforcement presentation by our planner, who, as you know, oversees the code enforcement division of the building department. And her presentation, so be it with intent, will lack the detail of what we do on the legal proceedings and some of the measures we're doing behind the scenes to bring code violators to legal proceedings. She will be able to give you an update on some of the internal initiatives that are going to be very obvious most recently and going forward within the Village of Ossining. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lori Lee, and Lynn, you can join her at the appropriate time.
Great. We'll start with the solid waste regulations. I did send out a draft. It had a typo, so I immediately resent the corrected one, and I did make some copies, so I have hard copies available if you don't have appropriate electronic devices to view the proposed changes and the topics and areas for discussion. So those are here. We started by looking really carefully with an eye toward being able to enforce these more quality of life issues associated with this, the solid waste regulations. So the first thing we did, which is actually at the end of this draft, was to make it clear in the enforcement section, that being Article 4, enforcement and penalties, that it's intended that these violations be one of strict liability, in that there's no reason why we would need to prove an intent to violate or that there was any necessary mental culpability on the part of the actor or the individual who fails to act under the regulations. So we're making that clear right up front for enforcement purposes. Clearly, it says in the provision that we drafted, it says it's intended that violations of this chapter shall be enforced under a strict liability standard and that no culpable mental state or mental culpability need be alleged or proven for any element or allegation. Proof of liability shall consist of evidence by personal observation that the conduct has occurred, consisting of the performance of an act or the omission to perform an act. So in other words, this makes it clear and puts the onus on the property owner individually, whether that be a person or an entity, to take the responsibility for all actions under the solid waste code. And then from that, we went back to the provisions of the code itself and beefed up some definitions to make it clear what could and couldn't be done, what was included and not included. And then we talked about the key provision in this is a proposed change to section 225.5, which had to do with maintaining properties and the maintaining of sidewalks adjacent to the properties. We took as a sample the provision in New York City under the Environmental Administration Code, the responsibility on the property owner to maintain that portion of the public right-of-way in front of their business or building straight into and the other side of the curb. This would require a lot of notification, a lot of public outreach to understand the limits of the maintenance obligations. Section B has to do applies to the owner of any property, and then they would need to maintain their entire premises free of litter. We define litter at the beginning to clearly include the myriad of solid waste options under the code, that being garbage, refuse, rubbish, as all of those terms are also defined, and all other waste material which, if thrown or deposited, tends to create a danger of public health, safety, and welfare, or tends to create a blight. So this would catch even an individual who owns a vacant piece of property. It is incumbent upon property owners, such as this, where it's inherent in the fact that it's vacant property, that the property owner is not present on the property. But it's incumbent upon even the owners of vacant properties to be mindful of the condition of their property vis-a-vis the solid waste, to be sure that it's put in the proper receptacles, that it's collected, that it's actually cleaned on a regular basis and maintained for the benefit of all. The second section we added was section C under this section 225.5, and it has to do with the owner of building or property immediately upon a sidewalk or flagstones or any public right-of-way out into the street. And it's the same level of requirement there, that the property owner should be responsible to cause or to maintain himself or herself that sidewalk which extends out into the street. And we used the model from New York City, which was 1.5 feet from the curbstone into the street. So that's really the gutter area of the street itself. So merely sweeping the sidewalk into that gutter area, of course, is it's adverse to the conditions under the code as well. So we used as a model the New York City role and responsibility of every property owner for these two provisions, coupled with the section in the back that makes this a strict liability standard. We will need to develop appropriate they're called informations, in order to be able to serve them. We do have an appropriate section that Bill and I are working on, having to do what level of service would be acceptable. I did a lot of research yesterday in the criminal procedure law and the CPLR, the civil procedure law, in what level of acceptable service, the courts have found in a civil action and in a criminal action. And we're trying to take the best of all the worlds and make sure that it's clear that you're responsible. It's clear that that responsibility is strict liability, and you'll be issued an information upon which will be listed the level of the fine. We did suggest some levels of penalties. You can see at the end, again, these provisions haven't been numbered because these are new provisions that we're putting in. The procedure for serving notices, and then the penalties for offenses. We're starting with actually looking at the repeat offenders in our internal meetings with staff from the Department of Sanitation and the rank and file. They indicate that the same properties could come under these provisions in a repeated way. So we wanted to have a sliding scale on the penalties to get the message across that this is serious, that you need to take responsibility, even if it's for your property manager or your tenants, and this level of responsibility could be built right into any leases or arrangements for property management. And given the opportunity, the owner can pass along the responsibility, but ultimately the buck stops on the owner of the property's desk, and that's how we would like to treat this. I did put at the end the opportunity for further action. As you know, many of the other chapters in the code require us to provide notice to give an opportunity to cure the violation. That isn't the intent in this section. However, that being said, if the property owner has the option to pay the fine or to challenge it, under the constraints, although a strict liability statute is a difficult, they're very narrow grounds upon which you can challenge the issuance of the ticket or the information. So that's why we're trying to be sure that the service of process is effective, and we're also trying to be sure the eventual ticket that we'll be drafting will meet all of the mandatory jurisdictional requirements under the case law and the statutory guidance that we're finding. But in the event that the level of violation raises to that of a public nuisance, we wanted to provide the opportunity for follow-up requests for action, and if the action should not occur, I have optional sections in the back whereby the village itself could step in, complete the task themselves, and then hopefully to assess the cost of what it took to clean up that, in the opinion of the Department of Public Works, that nuisance, and that could be demanded also in writing of the property owner, and should that not meet a deadline for payment, that could be re-levied as taxes and put as a lien on the property. So we have lots of options we're still looking into, but we're hoping to be able to find a way to put that in effectively, and also to put it in within the bounds of the law. The last section, which is a borrow from another code, I labeled it as a possible section. It has to do with also requiring our local businesses, takeout businesses, carry-out businesses, and the like, to declare it to be the duty of that owner or operator of that particular business to provide a appropriate receptacle at the door of the business. So people aren't necessarily carrying the litter out into the street and onto the sidewalk. This might minimize the responsibility on the owner to a certain degree, because this would require that owner to provide a suitable receptacle. I'm not suggesting at all with this possible provision that that's not already being done, but it sort of just makes it obvious that if you have a business that's generating this kind of solid waste on a regular basis to customers in the routine course of business, that it would be a requirement and incumbent upon the operator of the business to provide that appropriate receptacle at the doorway. So that's my presentation. Lynn, did you have anything further to add to that portion of it? The other area in the code has to do with the rules and regulations, as Paul was describing. They were, you know, the crew at the DPW yard was very helpful. They provided me with a copy of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 243, which are particularly stated guidelines for the storage and collection of residential, commercial, and institutional solid waste. So I did start to try to look at these. They're not mandatory, but they are really formal regulations with very solid and necessary standards and recommended procedures for the middle article of this chapter, which has to do with the collection, the day-to-day collection of solid waste by our staff. Size of receptacle, placement of receptacle, options such as that. We should spend some time looking at the section 225-14F having to do with recycling. I would like for us to clearly reference the county's recycling mandates in this paragraph. I'd like to expand it to be sure that everyone clearly understands that which is expected of them in a mandatory way in terms of source separating of the materials at their home. The article, that's Article 2, which just takes, I would imagine sending this over in a draft form and having those individuals who do this work on a daily basis to determine that which is in our code is sufficient. In other words, Section 22511, which has to do with branches, limbs, and cuttings, I want to make sure that the requirements now, the length tied, bundled, not more than 3 feet and not exceeding 50 pounds is still an appropriate standard. And certainly the staff in the field who are well aware of the recommendations of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 243, might have some input to that. So this article, the second article, I would like to be able to seek follow-up advice from the individuals that do this work on a daily basis. I did make some changes and clarifications based upon my reading of the federal regulations, but having their input would be invaluable for a very comprehensive fix to the solid waste law. And you can see Article 3 has to do with the issuance of local permits, which I don't believe we're doing anymore. So I'd like to make sure that Article 3 is in fact obsolete. It has to do with the private collectors of offensive materials and having to actually obtain a local permit for this, which I believe, no, actually the dumpster permit is, well, anyway, it really requires some further discussion about the local permit process for the materials. So that's really the thrust of this evening has to do with Article 1, the general provisions, new definitions, and the maintenance having to do with litter on the property, and also Article 4 at the end, the enforcement and penalties section. So that's what I wanted to focus on today. And I would entertain comments.
Go ahead, John.
So I'm looking at 22514, trash and refuse collection.
Yeah, this
When
is
you-
at
when-
Article 2.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
when you scroll down, you reference F, required recycling.
Yeah.
You talk about newspaper here, right?
That's all it says currently in our code, so I wanted to expand
So
this.
I would also,
Paper.
we also, there's more than just paper recycle. We also do glass.
That's correct.
And
yeah.
metal and the like. So wouldn't we want to reference that in the code?
Yeah, that's what it says in the comment. It says we have to expand this to reflect the county
Oh, okay.
requirements.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also would append that by saying that, and Lori Lee can help me out with how this would be enforceable. When we make through the clerk's office and through a public mailing, a public document, and we adopt it through issuance by the town village clerk, which is this solid waste newsletter. She posts it in her office and becomes a posted document. It becomes enforceable. And in there is where we get to the level of the type of paper, the type of 1 through 7 recycling for glass and plastic and commingles, and everything else as far as how you dispose of your solid organic or recyclable waste. So the fact that it's not in the code might make it difficult to prosecute with a ticket and maybe some court proceeding. But as far as what they're required to do is what is posted in the clerk's office through the solid waste newsletter as well.
So are you suggesting then that instead of having Article 2, Section F, whatever it is, about recycling, instead of going into detail there about, now you can do the gable cartons, you know, like instead of going to that detail, just have
No.
that be a reference
Yes.
to the annually printed.
Correct.
um,
And the
newsletter
rules and
and
regulations as promulgated by the County of Westchester there, and I could reference the.
So we don't have to say any of these words, we just say reference
That's what I'm
Right.
hoping.
village and the county.
Because it could
Okay.
change every year, like the
That's much
the
better.
milk cartons.
Right, the
that
milk
just-
cartons are now,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping to make this a very generalized section about the mandates referencing as promulgated by
Okay.
and is set forth in the, and his newsletter is also referenced in here. So it's published, it's circulated, it's mailed to property owners, it's made available at the clerk's office, and that is actually in here. So, you know, clearly, the department head can set forth the rules and procedures and to a level of degree that would be enforceable.
Great, please, go
I
ahead.
have a question. So I was driving around earlier today. There are a lot of bins collecting clothing and all that stuff. They're businesses. I used to think they used to be like my sister's place. They were not-for-profits, but they're actually, where do they fall in? Because there are piles of stuff outside of these big container bins. You know, the bins, I don't know what they're called. You know, you throw your clothing in, big metal.
That would be covered under litter, and it would be the property owner's responsibility.
Who's the
to be sure.
property owner of that? Like in the Arcadian, there
That
is
would be
in the
the owner of
back,
the
just
Arcadian.
tons of garbage was there this morning. So who is the owner and the property, and who is in charge of code enforcement for that?
Just in thinking, those organizations probably rent the parking lot, so it would probably fall under Stop and Shop to clean up because it's probably most likely their parking lot.
That's what I'm asking.
Lynn
That would
popped
be-
up when you
that's-
asked that
yeah,
question. so
I'm
maybe
waiting.
she-
here we
And I don't think they're actually organizations. I actually think a few of them are actual businesses.
You're correct, yes.
Yeah.
We've dealt with them on a code enforcement side. Actually, if it's not maintained, it's a property maintenance issue because it's on their property. And just some basic questions to some of the property owners. They've actually removed some of them around the village.
Okay.
So
Or they
there's
just
a
pick up
possibility.
more often, but
yes.
And I understand that it's hard to manage. I just wanted a definition, so under this, it's already covered. Those
Well, we've been-
folks are
We've
covered.
been focusing on it, yeah, currently. But in respect to your comment about the Arcadian, they're actually degreasing the lines there this morning, so that might be some of what you saw going on.
Yeah. And by the way, it wasn't there 3 days ago. I'm sure there's a bunch of people over the weekend that did some house cleaning and whatever, but I just didn't understand if it's covered, I'm happy, because I just think that some parts of our village is beginning to look like a little,
Yeah, that would be, tends to create a blight.
thank you.
Take us out.
The,
Oh, I guess not.
I
I
wasn't,
thought you were done.
I wasn't done, no, I'm not,
Right.
I'm not,
Go
not,
for it, John.
not anywhere near done.
Okay.
Just a comment. Well, I'm very pleased with this, particularly with Article 4, enforcement penalties, and Section A, in which somebody can't get a free pass because they're somehow mentally unstable and they've littered. I think that's pretty interesting. I like the graduation of the fines. The distributing of the instrument, it indicates that if the superintendent determines that the violation endangers the public health, safety, and welfare, or is in the public thoroughfare, such as a sidewalk, a written notice shall be affixed or posted, and shall be mailed to the property owner via overnight mail.
That's in the event of the nuisance. That's in addition to the fact that the property owner would be sent the ticket. We'll call it a ticket. It's
Right.
constitutes an
I think I'm
information.
thinking of the cost of the overnight mail. I guess that's built into the fine we're collecting, right? Okay, well, I'm just, these things cost money, but, no, I mean, I think this is.
We're gonna serve,
really good.
we're gonna serve the,
Yeah.
we'll call it a ticket. We're gonna serve the ticket, as you would serve any other court document.
Okay,
And that would simply just say, we found this violation, here's your fine, please pay it.
right.
And, and you always have the opportunity to say, that's not my property,
Right.
that's.
Fight it in court.
Yeah. And so you fight in court. In addition to that, and not instead of, in addition to that, we want the village to be able to declare whatever this condition is a blight or a nuisance, a public nuisance. Say things are piling up on a vacant property somewhere, and sure, we send a ticket to the property owner. They may or may not pay it, but in the event that the superintendent declares, and I define superintendent to include Paul's title as well. In the event that the superintendent says, not only is that a violation, it's also a nuisance,
Public hazard.
we have this additional level of notice. I'm going to give you 24 hours to fix this. If that doesn't happen, we have the right to go there, fix it, and then assess that additional cost
Okay.
in addition to the violation,
Okay.
the cost of the violation itself on that property.
I'm very pleased with this, so.
I like it. I like that addition as well.
So I have a question. So if someone leaves a couch outside on the street, does this provision allow the DPW to be contacted where someone will come and remove it, and then whatever that cost is, that'll be levied in the fine or the ticket?
To the
The
property
landowner.
owner?
No, the
The
property,
property
the
owner.
property would get the ticket
Okay.
assessing them the penalty
Okay.
for the violation.
But
And in addition to that, if we remove it, we can assess them the cost of that removal.
okay.
Yes.
But would the circumstances of a removal be like, oh, wow, it showed up on Friday night, it's not going to get picked up till Monday morning, that's really unpleasant for us to look at for the weekend, we're going to have a crew go out there on a Friday and pick it up?
No.
Or, no, there's not, we can't do it like that, right?
No.
Can.
Only if it's
That's what I want to understand.
only if
Why
it's
not?
the way I've drafted it. Only if it's akin to a public nuisance. In other words, if it's blocking traffic.
But it might be. If a couch is about
So
to
if a
fall
ca-
on a car because it's on a curb,
Yes.
then somebody has to make a decision.
So
I think it's we're putting this in for the egregious. If we and we've had it. We've had
Yeah.
couches left strewn on the sidewalk on Main Street, and there is a property that
Yeah.
fronts that parcel, that curb rather, and that will be where the ticket goes, and that'll also be where the reimbursement costs of the removal of the public nuisance will go.
So if there's garbage on Friday night all the way till Sunday, or a couch, is the village, if someone contacts the village and say, here it is, this is in front of my business, would this be the provision where you would get someone to pick it up and take it out?
Right,
And then-
we're
Well,
doing this.
You'd have to say that it's a nuisance, I think. You'd
Right.
have to actually make that
and send
declaration.
that declaration overnight. You know what I'm saying? It wouldn't happen instantaneously.
Okay.
There's still that level of additional notice that I'm proposing. This is not in stone. It's just a proposal.
There's always the ability, whether you recoup the cost or not, to
Yes.
bring people in and remove it. If it's deemed
Right.
just an eyesore and we're not going to go after the public nuisance, we will get the ticket at a
You don't
minimum.
right, you may not charge for the actual
The
removal
ticket
of
will
it,
be
yeah.
the ticket will be documented with
Right.
photographs and date stamps, etc. And then I will tell you that it's often that those items happen, they're reoccurring, hence the sliding scale. And the
Yeah.
next time they do that,
And are you suggesting that this information will also be printed now in what I have? One of the only things on my refrigerator is that piece of paper. Are you suggesting that you're going to inform people of this, or we're just going to put it into effect? That this is
this is not gonna we're not gonna do any shock and awe campaign here. We've been doing for the last year, and I could say about 6 months ago, we refined it to be specific to the village of Austin. We've been doing our OOP stickers. And the county offers municipalities OOP stickers that are very broad brush. This is put out improperly, contact
Right.
county DEF for information. And they never do. And even if they do, what's improper?
Right.
Ours are a little more specific. I don't know if anybody sitting here has received one. I won't ask that publicly. But
We're all gonna raise our hands at one, right?
but ours is actually issued by our sanitation foreman. In addition to running the logistics of the operation every day, he drives around and looks for oopses. And his frustration, I think, as Corporation Counsel expressed earlier, sometimes you could just put an oop sticker every week in front of the same house to no avail. Not anymore. That's not where we want to go with this.
Like it. And I'm certain this covers all of the folks that are putting things out Saturday afternoon and Sunday when, in fact, the pickup is on Monday. And so it's sitting out there, for not couches, but just they're garbage. I mean, I saw it again this weekend. So this covers, I think, that is because it's also the timing. So you might
You know,
have packed
I could
everything
tell you-
correctly, but you did it 48 hours early.
Right. A lot of things are in the code. There's some, there's discretion too. People have to remember that, we have to give people the ability to put stuff out the night before.
Yeah.
So sometimes when people see things out at 6:30, 7 p.m. on a Sunday, on a beautiful Sunday evening, that's allowed. And particularly if it's bulk trash
Yeah.
and it's put out properly and safely and it's not a nuisance, that's allowed.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of discretion with this. The the double-edged sword of the being a quaint village. There's a good relationship between a sanitation foreman and a lot of the residents because there's he goes around
Yeah.
a lot, so he has the ability to go to someone's door that might really be a legitimate oops and knock on the door. He's not going to give them a ticket because
Understood.
they made a human error, but this is really not where we're going with that. There is additional discretion that's going to be put into play by the folks in the field, but this is going to remedy a lot of the egregious.
No. Yay.
I also just need you to start thinking about the section after the penalties for offenses in 220. I don't know if I actually titled that one yet. In 225-28, the next section, which I'm proposing, I guess it would end up being 225-29, labeled enforcement. What I copied into this was the list from your Chapter 5 having to do with the issuance of appearance tickets. Obviously, this list is quite comprehensive and it includes titles that I don't personally recognize. So we need to start thinking about who would be included in the enforcement of this program. Clearly, we want to permit the police officers to issue these kinds of tickets and your code enforcement officers to issue these kinds of tickets. But you would need to include other relevant titles and personnel on your staff. For example, perhaps the foreman on the route, or any other individuals you'd like. So I put this in a different font, the list from Chapter 5, to start to get us just to think about who we would envision being able to write these tickets, because there's an administrative element that's involved, because not only do you write the ticket, you need to also, it's going to be written in some cases to a John Doe representing the owner of the property, and then there's research involved with coming back to the village records to determine the actual name and then follow up with that certified mailing to that individual in hard copy, because that's what we're proposing to do for service of process. When you're standing in front of a building that has too many trash receptacles on a regular basis, and you've done the oops stickers, and now you're ready to actually issue this ticket, we'll call it a ticket, you're going to leave a copy of that at the property, but because it's going to be issued to John Doe, being the owner of the property, you have to be able to assign that task of the administrative element, because service of process is that necessary step for the court to have jurisdiction.
Okay, but does that have to be the person who observes it on a Saturday afternoon? Does that have to be the same person? They can write the ticket to John Doe, and then the
And then-
research that is done and the follow-through or any appearance, so let's say somebody on this list, and I don't know, like a parks foreman or something, sees something and writes the ticket to John Doe, and then brings it back to the code enforcement office or to the police department or whatever is the,
Right,
the
you-
appropriate department for them
correct.
to be able to do the research and fill in the blanks of who the name is, right? We don't have to have the guy who wrote the ticket. be
No,
the one doing the
clearly
research.
not, but you
Okay.
would want to be sure that you understood that there's this administrative element. Departmental staff will need to be responsible to follow up, to determine from the assessor's records, the owner of record, and also to be sure that the certified mailings are done on a timely basis. Because if there's too much distance between the leaving of the ticket and the mailing of the ticket,
Okay.
that raises an issue for the
Why are
court.
we just?
Yeah, no,
can't we
my
just-
feeling, my sense of that would be that the reason the list is very exhaustive is because we want whoever's on staff and is capable of writing a ticket and making an accurate observation to be empowered to do it. I don't know if we want it to be accurate, so whatever the proper titles are that are reflective of who we are today. But yeah, I think generally we want as many people as possible to be able to write the ticket. Am I wrong? No? As appropriate? Okay, fine.
Yeah.
We don't need to figure that out. But-
No,
but I
we
do
don't need
wanna-
to figure it out tonight, but I just wanted you to understand
Fine.
that there's an administrative
I think there's a
element
lot of
to
things
it.
on here that still need to be figured out. So I guess
Yes.
that's really what my questions are is process-wise. I'm very pleased for moving forward with this, and we have a first draft to be able to review publicly. And it seems like sections 1 and most of 4 are in pretty good shape. There's still a lot of
I'd like
you know,
to circulate
adjustments
to
to
the
make.
staff at the DPW to get
Yeah,
their
and
input.
I think that's great to have not just ideas that sound good on paper, but ideas that are going to be able to be
Yeah.
followed through on by the sanitation staff. That sounds like a smart thing to do.
Great.
Then we kind of put this date on the calendar the last time we talked about it, and you came to us with a draft, and you got some the preliminary input from people. So then what's a reasonable next step for us to move it forward? Because I know we're all eager to be able to
Absolutely.
see this take place so that we can really do some enforcement for these kind of codes.
Well, I'm dependent upon now input from outside departments. So I would assume at the next work session, I think we have an extra week in there, so that wouldn't
Sure
that be three weeks? I would imagine I'd have more input
14th?
to bring it back to you. Let me get to my calendar. Is August? Yeah, because we have that extra week. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great.
So I'll bring it on the 14th. It should be in much better shape. It might even be ready to.
Be complete, no?
Yeah, it should be.
Okay.
It should be. You're entitled under the law to continue to tweak things right up to the point that you adopt them. But I'd like to get it on for public hearing, and so it needs to be in shape substantively, so you feel comfortable putting it on for public hearing.
Great.
I do
Okay.
have some.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Sorry,
Yes, no, that's fine.
kind of neglecting me here.
Oh, sorry, Manny, go ahead.
Unintentional.
It's really interesting to see that we actually finally get into this, which is great. Kind of disagree with Paul a little bit on what you said in regards to advertising and doing all this other stuff. I think we always should be letting people know, regardless of how much work we have done in the past. And I agree with you. We have done, and your office has done a lot of that outreach into the public, and how we're changing things and how we get to informing them what's going on. But I think it's never too late to do even more, especially when we're doing a big shift like this. I think it's important for us to let the public know that this is happening and this is real stuff that we actually going to be implementing. We're not going to take things lightly. In regards, we hear a lot of complaints, Main Street areas. I'm not going to get into specifics, but it bothers us, and it bothers it bothers as a community to see things of that nature. And just to be clear, actually, I got an oops sticker. It wasn't me. It was a tenant that was leaving and left the mattress without a plastic, even though I gave him that information before. So little things like that. So I took it back. I waited an extra week, wrap it up, put it back in there. So things of that, it happens all the time. So you just have to keep, like you said, it's a judgment call, and I think that's great. And I do agree with Laura Lee for what you said, and that was one of my questions. And who enforces this, and how do we can enforce this? Because I think that's essential to do that, on holidays, on weekends, after hours issues that I think is a concern. And you said is a supervisor position that will make the judgment call in what that means.
As to the nuisance.
As to the nuisance portion, that I'm not sure how can that be defined if it's after hours.
I could tell you that I'm glad you brought that last component up. We've received from you all, from the public, and even internally we discuss it, the enforcement of off-hour violators, right? And it's not just the main street is what we hear about the most because it's seen the most, but this happens on side streets, on cul-de-sacs, on dead ends, and we want to satisfy the neighbor on either side of the violator just as much as the thousands of people that drive down the Upper Crescent every day, right? So that's where we're headed with that. As far as the off-hour enforcement and routine village-wide inspections, I did not want to start altering people's schedules to come in to do enforcement that had no teeth. We will consider changes and off-hour personnel when those people are going to be able to justify their off-hour work by going around issuing tickets, recouping the cost via penalty from the violators to the point where the ends justify the means. We don't want them just to drive around and notice a couch the same way the police could have noticed a couch, the same way their neighbor could have noticed a couch. The people that are going to come around off hours when this gets implemented are going to be there with purpose.
And I think that's what we want. I think that's what we're looking for. So, all
Good
right.
answer, Paul. Okay. Did you have more on your list?
Good.
All right.
All right, I'll keep you posted on the comments that are coming in.
All right.
and We'll go from there.
Thank you, Lori Lee. So
So we're putting this back on for the work session?
14th,
The
yeah.
14th of September, okay.
put it on the 14th. But before we close this out, we do want to bring Lynn up to the dais because her last presentation, where I don't want to say it was mislabeled, but she did more of an overall department planning, building, zoning, and code enforcement presentation, was a little shy on the code enforcement facet. So she's going to expand on that a little bit this evening. But I do want to preface what she has to say by telling you that one of the advantages of me coming into this role now and also having the DPW experience is that what we're doing, and I'm staying vague on purpose, is we're taking a lot of whether it's intrinsic or actual number-based data through different departments and pooling it together to assist with what was otherwise and previously just a visual assessment of properties to see if they potentially are or are not code violators. Now we're adding a little more substance under the purview of our prosecutor, our deputy counsel, Bill Hamilton, who was in here with Lynn the last time around, presenting some of his plans for future court proceedings on code violators. We're pulling that together and making what he walks into the courtroom with a little more fortified. So with that in mind, Lynn's going to do a little more detail than that, but not that much detail where we're going to compromise the process and our plans to expose some of these code violators.
Thank you for that introduction. So to follow up on what the interim village manager has said, and also to borrow from what Kevin Dworka mentioned earlier, that in this new role for code enforcement, we're borrowing from a lot of information that a lot of different departments and resources have under their belts just from doing what they're doing in a sort of segmented way and not sort of coordinating and communicating, and we've reached out to look at that information and to coordinate and to see how those pieces fit together in a puzzle and help us build up and understand where we have egregious violations. So just to be vague, like we've spoken to sanitation, we've spoken to the water department, we've spoken to Section 8, we've spoken to outside sources, and we're starting to put together with the police where some of our current violators in other, so like the police look at one thing when they're looking at violations, sanitation looks at one thing, they're not looking for property maintenance issues, they're looking at egregious violations with garbage, bulk, all of that. So if we start to layer our data sets, we start to see where there are connections. As I've said before in other conversations, we've also started to partner. We've started to partner with the school district, just opening the conversation. We're looking at I guess also, sorry, I'm like all over the place tonight. With respect to quality of life, we're hoping that this will start to help us add some teeth into addressing quality of life code violations, and similarly starting small and making people realize that trash on the street or too much trash on the street could actually force people to clean up their act, not just with respect to trash, but with respect to some of the larger issues, property maintenance, egregious code violations, and recognizing where some of our problem spots are. With that said, we've also, I know at least one of you has noticed, we've started doing, taking code issues, like if you've seen something on the street, you can actually submit it to us via the web. And I know one of you has already done that, and we're looking into that.
It worked pretty well.
And we're also looking to be more responsive on an efficiency level to looking into and following up on those complaints to make sure that if there is a violation, we're actually issuing a violation. Because the way our process works right now, as you know, you have to issue an order to remedy, wait for a time to them to solve the problem, remedy it. If they don't remedy it, we issue a notice of violation. There's always notice. So it's not like we can solve the problem it's not like a parking ticket. None of our violations are like a parking ticket. So you can't just walk in and just we say, okay, that's it. We're gonna fine you, resolve the problem. Here's a $1,500 fine, and come to court, deal with the judge. And then I guess the key to my discussion tonight is really that we're trying to create linkages and trying to connect dots that probably were there, but they weren't connected before. So I'm open to questions. I feel like
I think we're being
everyone's
very
wanting
careful
to-
with our questions because everything was sort of prefaced that you're being careful in how much you're saying because you don't want to undermine the integrity of the process that you're undergoing. But, yeah. Go
Well,
ahead, John.
I'll just make a comment, which is that for the first time since I've been on this board in Witness Village government, we are actually consciously connecting those dots and realizing that they're, everything's connected, and we haven't really done that in the past. And data is a really cool thing, and if you put the right pieces of data together, it's going to tell a story, and those stories are going to lead us to be able to make our village a better place to live, cleaner. People who have gross violations, we're just not going to permit that, and that'll send a message to the people that are egregious and are, perpetual violators. I've lived here for 27 years. I see it all the time, and I can't wait. So carry on.
By the way, when you were referring to at least one of us has tried out the new system, I did, but I didn't go to it from our homepage. So now I'm just looking at our homepage, and it's right up there on the top of the.
And like a bright tan yellow.
Yes, it's in a different color. It's a different font, and you click on that, and you get a little form to fill out. It says choose type. There's only one type. It's code enforcement submissions. So that's pretty easy to figure out. And then it's like your name and your contact information, and then you have an opportunity to. Oh, I can't do it without filling out the information. You have an opportunity to say, identify the questionable violation that you think you may be seeing in the community, and it goes right to your department. Now, I'll say, I didn't know until now that you'd gotten it or what might be happening with it. But you are getting them.
Yes, thanks to your submission, we've tweaked some of the processes about how we notify people and let them know that we got their
Was I the only one who's
complaint.
done it so far?
Well, we put it up as a test. You happen to be one of the first people that sent us a complaint that we realized we didn't
Send me an email.
we didn't close out the process and how to tell you that we actually got it and we're going to follow up on it and all
Right.
that. So thanks for actually doing that, even though you didn't realize that you were a guinea pig. But
Totally knew I was a guinea pig.
yes.
Others?
I do have a quick question. It's kind of related to, I think, as a whole, and how the department, for what we've been talking about, how the department is heading technology.
Yes.
I think that's going to be a big component to help the process, or even filling out the tickets. That you don't have to go to administrative staff. Something like a simple tablet that will have all that information in there, and just put in the address, and automatically that information of the owner comes up. From previous conversations that I had with Fernando in the third floor in the assessor's office, he had mentioned to me, and I'm pretty sure it's still going on, or how often that goes on, but he said that he sends a CD with the information of the assessed properties within the village of Austin. That is a shared system. It's not, the building department cannot modify anything, but you can access all the property stuff. So that could be something that we can utilize, or the department can utilize with something, with an app or something I guess technology is a beautiful element that we live on this world now. But so that means that, Lorelei, so can I still take pictures on the weekends? After?
Well,
We encourage pictures and affidavits,
Good.
yes.
All right. I'll
you
fill
can take
that in.
pictures and send it to us.
All right, but I think that's part of the, of a bigger picture. That I think what it should be heading at the end of the day is acknowledging how that will help you guys and the department itself to make it work even better. So
Yes. Can I just add a note to that? So you can send us pictures, but if you do send us pictures, just make sure that it's really clear from the picture so we can tell where it is. So if you just take a picture of a trash can, but we can't tell whether it's on Main Street or Spring Street, it's not really going to help us with enforcement. So either you need to provide a little bit of a narrative or something that can give us a clue.
All right. We good? Thank you very much.
Any more questions?
You've had a big night with us. Thank you very much. I think, Lori Lee, you're still up.
Okay, I'm still up. I asked to add this quick topic due to the fact that it's been all over the news, and it has to do with support in opposition of the Anchorage sites being proposed by the United States Coast Guard. That being their 10 new sites, it consists of about 2,400 acres of estuary lands underwater of the Hudson River. And so I had a quick conversation with Victoria. I indicated that I was willing to take a look a little bit at the facts of the matter. I did contact the Riverkeeper. They were very helpful in providing me some background information. And also, I note that today's Journal News also contained yet another article about the proposed sites. 3 of the sites are actually in this area, that being Montrose and Yonkers, and then across the river there's a Tompkins Cove section. So I thought that it might be worthy of a discussion tonight to see if the board was in favor of encouraging the Coast Guard to continue with the public forum process. I know that under rulemaking, the time has passed for us to mandate public hearings, but because this is really still an internal matter at the United States Coast Guard, I know this evening in Dutchess County they're holding a public forum, and I think it perhaps would be in the best interests of local communities to have a public forum closer to the 2 sites and 3 sites that are a little farther south on the Hudson River. And so I took a stab at a resolution, and I wanted to get your thoughts about moving forward with supporting efforts to get more public comment. I know that the written comments are being accepted through the first week in September, but this would be to encourage more of a public forum, interactive opportunity for local residents and constituents of the communities to be able to voice opinions and to be able to speak earlier in the process. I know should the Coast Guard decide to propose an action that they would need to, of course, do an environmental impact study, and that necessitates the need for a public hearing. But that's a lot farther down the line in the process, and I think if we learned anything as residents of this community, once the ball is rolling, like in the Algonquin pipeline issue, it's very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. At this point in the process, the genie's still in the bottle. It's still an idea that's being floated at the request of the industry. These essential parking lots for these large barges would permit commercial entities to park goods, which would include crude oil and things of a hazardous nature, very close to this area of the Hudson River. And so the Hudson, of course, flows south from Kingston, and anything that would spoil upriver would essentially impact you as well. So those were my thoughts. I did circulate a draft resolution for you to take a look at, and I entertain questions and specifics on the project itself and my interaction with Riverkeeper if you were interested.
Go ahead, John. I can see that you have something to say on this.
Yeah, so, this is, the notion of parking these industrial ships and barges in the river is just, it's such a bad idea, and it could have a devastating economic impact to the Hudson River and all the work that's been done to really create a place where recreational boating takes place. I mean, I can't imagine having these large barges jamming up the river. The anchors are going to disrupt the riverbed itself. These large boats will have to be lit up. The visual impact would be horrible. This is bad for so many reasons, and I strongly urge my other board members to vote for this resolution to at least send a message, to the Coast Guard that this is not a good idea. So I'll leave it at that.
Does anybody else want to comment?
So, John, you don't like that idea?
Didn't I just say that? Or?
Well, I'll give a 2-second history on how this really came to our attention. Aside from the fact that it is in the news, municipalities along the Hudson River were specifically asked by our friends at the Historic Hudson River Towns. This is called to our attention that this is a concern for our communities, for all the surrounding communities, all of us who look to the Hudson not only for recreation but for economic development, and just because it's an absolutely beautiful place to live, and it's why so many of us do choose to live here, and that this use of it is inconsistent with our desires for the Hudson and how we currently are able to enjoy it. And so a number of municipalities, there's been quite a lengthy thread going around between municipalities, and Cortland recently sent out a press release. They would be one of the ones that would be most directly affected with the potential Montrose site. And so from time to time, we entertain letters of support, passing resolutions, or sending letters, really to make a statement about a regional issue, and that's what this is. And it's something that could affect us very directly, and at the very least is impacting the character of the Hudson River in our area. So I think that I don't see any reason to not be entirely supportive of this. I don't know if we are ready to make a motion to vote on this resolution tonight, or does it need to wait until next week?
Why can't we do it tonight?
You certainly can. You can, you know, the requirement, of course, is to take minutes of any action that you
All right.
take, and we could do that, but I just wanted to be sure that, yeah.
We can also do it tonight and move forward on it.
And it could, yes, you could do it next week, and it would be on a published agenda, which may or may not be useful to the cause, I don't know, or you could choose to take action tonight. We could read it into the record. It's clearly up to you. Again, the comment period, meaning that they would not consider this to be a proposed action. You know, that comment period is not closing until September 7th. But what we're trying to do, I believe, is to encourage an increased number of forums in you know, convenient locations and for obvious reasons, the lower communities where this will be impacted. So
If
I
I
stand
may.
prepared
I'm
for
sorry.
whatever.
And I agree with the statement that John made and Victoria as well. I think this is very important. I mean, it's just interesting to see how government works and other agencies that the Hudson River pretty much has been trying to be remapping itself, and all these communities that have worked so hard to get to where they are right now. And with little things and little changes like this, it will be a drastic negative view to what all these communities have been working to be, and just to remap their image and their possibilities to do with the water. So yeah, I'm 100% behind this. You know,
I'm
with
ready to
Rika,
vote.
I don't have a problem waiting till next week. I mean, we've done something like this
You won't be
before
here
in the
next
past.
week, so if you want it on the record as all five of us, this would be the right time to do it.
Okay, then maybe we could vote tonight, and we could put out a little press release acknowledging that we voted on this unanimously, and we're very pleased to be supporting the efforts of so many Hudson River communities to draw attention to this. So.
All right, and I do indicate in here that we have the ability to follow up with an actual letter. I mean, we're suggesting that this resolution be sent, but, you know, the letter requesting the additional forums might be in order as well. So I'd put that at the end, and you can choose to leave that in or take it out. It's completely up to you. If you would like me to read it, I will do that.
What do we need to do here?
So
I'm
Lori
go-
Lee is
I'm
going
going
to
to take
do
minutes.
give us directive to make sure we do it all
Okay.
properly.
I'm going to take minutes. I'm going to
Switch, or should we have to go to legislation now?
No, we're just taking minutes of action that you're taking at this. It's a publicly noticed meeting, and the requirements are that you've publicly noticed the meeting, not necessarily the agenda. So I can read it. I'll read the resolution. I'll take a first and a second, and then we can discuss and vote from there.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to write the time down, because that always helps when I contact the clerk to give her my minutes. Okay, it's 10 p.m. This is a resolution in opposition to the designation of 2,400 acres of Hudson River estuary as anchorage areas for commercial barges. Whereas the village has recently been notified that the United States Coast Guard, in an effort to inform its own internal review, is taking public comment with respect to a proposal to designate 2,400 acres of Hudson River estuary as anchorage areas for commercial barges along the Hudson shoreline from Yonkers to Kingston. And whereas the designation of these new anchorage grounds, which would become water-based parking areas for commercial barges on the way to and from the ever busier port of Albany, portends an increase in barge traffic on the Hudson River, with the potential to affect the ecological health of the river and the quality of life of its riverfront communities, including the village of Ossining. And whereas such efforts by the Coast Guard would serve to re-industrialize the Hudson River in areas undergoing transformation coastal revitalization and adaptive reuse, more in keeping with stated local long-term waterfront goals and regional initiatives towards Hudson Valley tourism. And whereas the establishment of these anchorages would cause noise and light pollution, produce riverbed scarring of delicate river bottom habitat through the use of heavy ground tackle, and congregate dangerous materials such as crude oil directly adjacent to the shoreline. And whereas this proposed action appears to be adverse to the policy set forth in the Village of Ossining Local Waterfront Revitalization Plan, adopted on July 2nd, 1991, and amended on March 16th, 2011, and has the potential to adversely affect residents' quality of life, chill revitalization efforts in tourism, which, among other things, are dependent upon protection and enhancement of views along the waterfront area. And whereas the Village Board of Trustee feels that all perspectives should be accounted for and public comments and community concerns should be considered during this initial phase of consideration by the U.S. Coast Guard and prior to the taking of any formal action. Now therefore be it resolved that the Village Board of Trustee hereby voices its opposition to the proposal by the U.S. Coast Guard to designate 2,400 acres of Hudson River estuary as anchorage areas for commercial barges along the Hudson shoreline from Yonkers to Kingston, and be it further resolved that the board calls upon the U.S. Coast Guard to increase the ability for public comment through the scheduling and active promotion of additional public forums that are easily accessible throughout the affected area, so that the community concerns over this complex proposal can be heard and integrated into the rulemaking process as early as possible. And be it further resolved that the Village Board of Trustees does hereby direct that a copy of the resolution be forwarded to the members of the United States Congress representing the Village of Ossining, and authorizes the mayor to sign any and all correspondence on this topic to communicate the village's concern. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
On the board, would anyone like to further comment? All right, Madam Corporation Counsel.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm writing down the time at 10:04. Thanks.
Effective short thing we've done in a while.
Oh, last week's meeting was kind of a record setter. All
Oh,
right,
yes, thank you for
Interim
reminding me.
Manager Frioli.
Turn the microphone on now.
Again,
I think that's 100% tonight, Paul.
Me
Go on
leaning
vacation.
back, you with the microphone. Excellent.
that concludes the public portion of this evening's work session. I believe the board wishes to adjourn into executive session.
Yes.
And advice of counsel, but yes.
Okay.
So with that, thank you. Please join us next week for the legislative session at the Birdsall Fagan Police Court facility, which will be, what, the 17th of August?
Yep.
And Deputy Mayor Codman will be taking the gavel.
Presiding, yes.
Yes, and I wish everyone a continued lovely summer vacation. You're adjourned to executive session and advice of counsel.